Our closing speaker today is Andrew Keen, who is an author and entrepreneur. I first met Andrew a couple of years ago over an extremely pleasant dinner at the Internet Governance Forum meeting in Rio, which was about the time his first book, Cult of the Amateur: How the Internet is Killing Our Culture, was coming out. That book has since been published in 15 languages and was shortlisted for the 2008 Higgins Business Technology Book of the Year. Between 1995 and 2005, Andrew worked with a number of Silicon Valley startups, including founding AudioCafe.com, a first-generation internet music company. He is currently working on a second book, Digital Vertigo: Anxiety, Loneliness, and Inequality in the Social Media Age, which hopefully we can expect to be as provocative as his first book, and he has promised that he's going to be provocative right now. So please welcome Andrew Keen.
Oh my God, it's lovely here. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a fascinating event for me as kind of an outsider, as Silicon Valley person, and as an author. I'll try not to talk about network neutrality because I don't understand it, but I may throw in no, no sunglasses. What I'll try to do in 15 or 20 minutes is, I'll put my timer on so I won't go over. What I'll try and do is wrap the thing up. I think I've been to most of the sessions, so I'll try and bring it to a close. And in particular, I'll try and refer back to Carly Fiorina's opening speech, which I thought was very interesting, very provocative. I don't have any voting rights in America anyway, but if I could vote, I always promised myself that I would never vote for a Republican. However, having heard her, I have to admit that maybe she's really a Democrat, because she made a lot of sense, although I didn't agree with everything she was saying. So the subject of this conference is the US losing its edge? The word edge, of course, is a complex word. I haven't heard really any linguistic definitions, but of course, I like to consider myself having edge. It's what enables me to get speeches like this and sell books. The question of edge, of course, has been presented for the most part in this conference in economic terms, but I think we also need to think of it culturally and socially. I think that's one of the great questions about this country, is why it's losing its edge. I thought I might begin by wearing a couple of hats that I don't think anyone has presented themselves within this event. Firstly, an outsider, as some of you may can guess from my accent. I wasn't born in the United States, and I think I'm the first non-American speaker at the event. Is that fair? I don't know if anyone else? Second, I apologize. But I thought that it's worth noting that I came to America for its edge. I came in the early 80s to graduate school at UC Berkeley, but I came as a lover of American culture. I'd read Woodward. I grew up in England, and we'd read Woodward and Bernstein when we were in school, and we were amazed by the vitality of this democracy. And we were amazed by the vitality of the free press and the fact that journalists could actually bring down a corrupt government. I grew up with Scorsese and Coppola and the whole remarkable richness of American movies. Most of all, I think I grew up as a writer with American writers, Philip Roth, of course, and that remarkable tradition of American realism, and of course, more than anything else, American music. Dylan, Springsteen, these were the things that brought me to America. That's why America, for me, in the early 80s, had edge. That's why I came here. That's why I chose to invest myself, my resources, my creativity, my abilities in this country. That's why I married an American. That's why I have American children. And my generation, I think, came for relatively similar reasons. I'm not saying everyone came to America because they had a love affair with American media. That would be an oversimplification. But I think it's a very, very important thing that's forgotten. And I think that when we think of America in 2010 versus America in, say, 1982, 1983, you see a very different America. You see, as Carrie Sherman said, an America where the music industry is essentially collapsed. You see an incredibly problematic journalistic industry where it wouldn't be viable anymore to have a Woodward and Bernstein. You have a Hollywood in retreat. So I think it's an important point to note that as an outsider, the edge that America perhaps has lost is more than just economic, it's cultural. What does America have to say for itself? Why would people come here culturally? They may come for Facebook or my friend Reid Hoffman's LinkedIn. And those aren't insignificant achievements, but I think they're less significant, less edge-like, less important in historical terms than the cultural achievements of late 20th century or mid to late 20th century American life. It's also worth me noting that I'm speaking here as a creative person. I'm an entrepreneur, although I shouldn't say this publicly, for the most part a failed entrepreneur, but I'm also a creative person. I make my living as a writer. I have a weekly video interview show on TechCrunch.tv. I do a show about creativity on the Harvard Business Review. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, shall we say, creative rights, the rights of the creative community. And I think one of the things that was missing in the last 2 days is the failure to distinguish or the failure to talk about creativity in the context of innovation. Because those two words go together, but they're separate as well. And what America is facing is a crisis of creativity. My friend Poe Bronson, you may have read his cover story for Newsweek a few weeks ago, talking about the creativity crisis in American schools. You may have read John Hagel and John Seeley Brown's book about the power of pull. My friend Don Tapscott's coming out with a book in September, something about Wikinomics, talking about the 21st century being critical for creative industries. Richard Florida wrote a brilliant book at the beginning of the 21st century called The Creative Class. And I think when we think about innovation, we also need to think about creativity. We need to think about building an economy, an environment, I don't like the word ecosystem, but that's the word some of you use, an ecosystem that respects and rewards creativity. Now, I'm not saying that the 21st century will be dominated by everyone becoming Philip Roth or Bruce Springsteen or Martin Scorsese. That isn't realistic, and the glory days are finished, for better or worse. It doesn't make me happy to say it, but it's a reality. But we do need to figure out ways of rewarding creativity, of unusual talent, because innovation and creativity is about talent. And given that the platform that we're inventing, the internet, is the world of the 21st century, it's no longer separate. Clay Shirky now talks about there being no distinction between the internet and the world, and he's absolutely right. What we are inventing is a platform, a network, a world for the real world. And this is a world that we need to reward. The key thing in the 21st century, as Fiorina says, it's innovation, or I would say it's creativity. So let me just very briefly mention 3 dates, 3 periods in internet history to throw out my attitude to policy and where we've been and where I'd like us to go. Carly said she threw out 3 metrics, 15 years ago, 6 years ago, and today. 15 years ago, I founded Audio Cafe, literally at my kitchen table, because I saw a perfect opportunity to distribute high-quality content. It was a music information site, not very original, but it was an electronic publication that distributed the highest quality music writing from people on the New York Times, the New Yorker, and so on and so forth. Like everybody else, I think, or like most people in the first generation internet economic revolution, I made a fundamental error. I gave the stuff away for free. We fell into the illusion, that first generation internet entrepreneurial class that you didn't need to charge for content anymore, that you could distribute your stuff online, get people to look at it, and that your businesses would be supported by advertising. That was a mistake. It was the reason why Audio Cafe didn't work out. It was the reason why the vast majority of first-generation internet businesses didn't work. And it's the reason today why some of the surviving first-generation internet businesses, like the New York Times and the WallStreetJournal.com, are now switching to a paid model. The economics don't work. So while the internet is a marvelous distribution mechanism for high-quality curated content, the only way it can work in real business terms is charging for that content. The old television model, for the most part, doesn't work. Let me talk about 6 years ago. 6 years ago, literally almost to this month, I was invited to an event called Foo Camp in Sebastopol, Northern California, by Tim O'Reilly. Foo stands for Friends of O'Reilly. It was an insider Silicon Valley event in which they were celebrating something that O'Reilly had created and invented, a term called Web 2.0. It was the new revolution, the way to figure out the future of media. These guys thought that they'd figured it out. What they said was they'd created these platforms, these blogging platforms, YouTube, MySpace, the other user-generated technology platforms that enabled all of us to create content. Media would be democratized. The old hierarchies, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Hollywood, the music industry, all these things would be done away with. These people were ideologues, idealists of the internet. They saw the internet as solving what at least they saw was a fundamental mistake in the history of American politics and culture, that a small group of people could control media. They could control it, they could determine who would be published, they could determine what the values were, and this was unfair, it was anti-democratic, and it reflected class, social, sexual, religious, geographical interests. You've all heard this argument hundreds of times before. I went to this event and I realized they were wrong. They were wrong for a couple of reasons. They were wrong, firstly, because the economics don't work. As has been proved time and time again by most of the Web 2.0 companies, even when you create all this user-generated content, it's still very difficult to generate a real business. They were wrong because they failed to understand that high-quality content needs to be curated. They failed to understand that the only way to get reliable information is to have what they call gatekeepers, is to have people who are professional, who are not anonymous, who are accountable. A transparent media requires editors and music publishers and engineers, taste makers. They didn't understand that a reliable media required, perhaps in their mind, injustice. In my mind, it's just a reality of the way the world works. That some people know more than others, that some people have more ability than others, and that the only way to get people to pay for content, whether it's music or journalism or movies, is to invest and develop in that talent. So I wrote a book called The Cult of the Amateur, which came out, which created a huge controversy. It was opposed to Chris Anderson's book, The Long Tail, which some of you may have read. A couple of weeks ago, I bumped into Anderson in a San Francisco restaurant. The guy still doesn't like me. He basically refused to acknowledge my presence, but when we had a mutual friend, he came up to me and said, "Do you remember me?" Because we'd done some debates early on. I said, "Yeah, I remember you." He said, "You've made a career out of trashing me." Truth is, though, that these people like Anderson and Lessig and Shirky were wrong. They were wrong that you could get a viable media ecosystem and do away with the professional. They were wrong that you could get high-quality information. They were wrong, and some of them have acknowledged this, like Clay Shirky, they were wrong that you could get a new ecosystem that was idealistically democratic, without gatekeepers, without professionals, and could still produce high-quality, monetizable content. So Web 2.0 is finished. It's over. It doesn't really work. When you see the appearance of viable so-called Web 2.0 companies like YouTube, they are shifting to a a more professional model where they're licensing high-quality content. They won't necessarily acknowledge this publicly. But the reality is that the most viable Web 2.0 companies are becoming traditional media companies. So where are we today? In the environment of a post-Web 2.0 world, an apps world, a world where people are beginning to pay for content again, where the most exciting hardware product is the iPad, where there is a new, I think, energy and appetite for paid content. We're at a point, I think, from the creative class, and this, I'll throw some probably ill-advised grenades into the net neutrality debate. We're at a point where, as a creator, I want my work to have priority. I acknowledge that the internet is the future of media, that the book is dead, that the physical movie is dead, that the CD is dead. The digital, like it or not, and I'm ambivalent about that, I'm not a Luddite, the internet, like it or not, is the future of creativity. It's the future of a professional creative class. Just today, Seth Godin announced that he was leaving his publisher and he was going to self-publish. You're going to see this more and more in books, you're going to see it more and more in music, you're even going to see it in movies. Now, given that the internet has become this remarkable platform for the distribution of content, high-quality content, of people like Seth Godin, I want, ideally, to buy privilege. I don't understand why I can't acquire the fast lane. Just as I came here in first class on United Airlines because I'm a frequent traveler, so I would like at least the opportunity to acquire privilege on this platform. Privilege as an artist, privilege because my livelihood is invested in building secure relationships with my audience, either as a videographer or as a writer. There's, of course, as Kerry Sherman introduced, the issue of piracy. That's given. I don't want people stealing my stuff. I'm happy to use the internet as it exists, but I would like the option of luxury services. It's my livelihood. It's my bookstore. It's my video store. It's where I have to make my living. And the future of the creative class, and indeed the very nature of innovation in the 21st century, lies on this platform. So if we allow the ideologues, people like free press and public knowledge, who are politicizing the internet, who are inventing it as some sort of idealized utopian platform for social equality, then I think we are fundamentally undermining the rights of the creative class and the prosperity of America in the 21st century. If you want America to maintain its edge, you've got to enable me and people like myself to have that edge and indeed buy it. There's nothing wrong with buying edge. There's nothing wrong with buying privilege. That's the nature of the market. How many people can afford to come here? How many people can afford to travel first class? Other industries enable consumers and producers to buy privilege. I don't understand why, as the internet evolves, as the critical, fundamental, central, and excuse the pun, given it's the edge, platform, institution of creative life in the 21st century, I want my stuff to be guaranteed. I want to have the best access to my audience, and I want my audience to have the best access to me. The real truth is that the Web 2.0 people were wrong. We're not doing away with audience in the 21st century. Talent still exists. There are still groups of people who, for one reason or other, through hard work or luck, or just genius, just born genius, are able to do more interesting things than other people. And unless we maintain their viability in economic and cultural terms, then you're not going to find many people wanting to come to America. You're not going to find many people who believe in America, in its edge, in its vitality, to such an extent that they will invest their lives in it. Doesn't matter whether you have HB visas coming out of the wazoo, you still need people coming, wanting to come here. And that's what America needs to maintain in the 21st century. Thank you.
Andrew, as we have some time for some questions if somebody wants to rise to the provocation.
That wasn't provocative, was it?
So I'll rise to the provocation. So Andrew, you when we were talking yesterday, you explained yourself to me as I think you said you were a left authoritarian, and I didn't quite get what that meant, but now I think I do. And I have to say, with all respect, I actually don't think you get what America is about. Because I think the story that you've told, the analysis that you have, misses two critical things that I think we believe in America and that have worked. Number one, I don't think you really are prepared to embrace risk. And number two, I think you're scared of democracy. I think that what you're looking for is a kind of a mercantilist, elitist environment in the internet environment. And that may work in other cultures. I mean, my hat's off. I feel that maybe, you know, I almost feel that I'm in France, actually. I love France for its elitism and its confidence in its tradition. But I think that's never what America's been about. I think that we've never believed that we should reward those who succeeded last time. We've always looked to reward those who are succeeding next time. And I'm just kind of surprised that you're a perceptive person and you've been here a long time. And the amazing thing to me is that I think your very career, as you describe it, the fact that you've succeeded as a creative person in this internet environment makes me wonder whether you really believe what you're saying.
Well, but what?
But thank you.
No, but let me respond to that, because I think it's an interesting point. But when did I talk about natural privilege? When did I talk about people having intrinsic rights? I think that just in any other industry, you work for those rights. I'm not suggesting that the son of Philip Roth or of Martin Scorsese, I don't believe in some ancien regime. I'm simply saying that I don't think I use the word, when I use the word privilege, are you suggesting then that you should eliminate first-class travel, or that you should knock hotels like this down for people who want to invest money in luxury and in quality? Are you suggesting that everyone should drive the same car? Are you suggesting that we should all wear the same clothes? Because I think you're the one who's un-American, not me. I mean, I came to this country for the opportunity. I had no rights. I showed up in Oakland in 1982. I had no privileges. And I've made, you know, whatever you might think of me, I've made of myself what I have through hard work, not through privilege, not through birth. So I don't really see what I said in the speech, which reflected some sort of ancien regime, some support of ancien regime privilege. And I think your question reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of media, that you find this in groups like Public Knowledge, the idea that flatness is fair, and that any kind of you know, if culture isn't free, it's unfair. Artists are taking advantage of the people. And I think that that is un-American. It's not what this country was founded on. I used to teach American history. My hero is Madison and Hamilton. And that's the tradition which I really respect, which is rewarding hard work and creating a system not of hierarchy, but not of equality for the sake of equality. And that's what the flatteners in the digital world are trying to do. They're trying to do away with the rights of people to buy extra services. I think that that is an intrinsic American right, not an un-American right.
Somebody else needs to talk about what it means to be an American.
I'm not going to wade into the back and forth that you and Danny just had, but I do have a question for you, Andrew, because you mentioned that you think people who are being more creative than others need or should be able to get the additional luxury or protection. To take the other side of the argument I usually do about from free press. And why don't you think if people have the intrinsic ability to compete and are more creative than others, that if they all are on the same internet without the additional luxury, they won't rise to the top? You've succeeded because you came here with nothing. You've succeeded because you've got something that people wanted. So why do you suggest, and I'm being somewhat devil's advocate, because as working for Verizon, I completely believe in the ability for people to pay for services and pay more than others for services. But why do you think, why a separate guaranteed luxury lane as opposed to following what I think is an inherent American value of competition and competing and succeeding on your own merits?
Well, maybe I think I may have misrepresented myself. I'm certainly not suggesting that one should be able to buy the right on the internet not to compete. And I don't think that's viable. I mean, you can't pay to have people read your work. If you're a bad writer, you can spend $1 million on the best lane on the internet and still no one's going to read you. So that's not my point. I think it perhaps comes back to what someone like Carrie Sherman was talking about earlier, about, say, the problem of piracy. Piracy is a fundamental problem for all creative people. Paul McGuinness, the manager of U2, just wrote an excellent piece in the British GQ about the way in which piracy is decimating the music industry. As a writer, I know, I've talked to the chairman of Macmillan, who's the publisher of my next book. They are deeply worried about piracy. So I think, for example, and again, this is all speculative, because like all of you here, no one understands what the future of the internet is. But I like the idea of potentially having services in the future which can guarantee my work against piracy, because that is my livelihood. Now, I don't know if that's buying privilege. Maybe I threw that word in as a provocation. But it buys me certainty as an economic actor. And I would like to buy that if it was available. Now, if it's available on the internet, then that's great. But as Carrie made clear when it comes to the music business, it currently isn't available on the internet. At the moment, if you're in a band and you put your stuff online, most of it's stolen. And you're seeing the same thing more and more with writing. Now, this is an inconvenient truth. It's a truth that most of us don't like to acknowledge. But as a creative artist, it's the truth. And that's how I earn my living. So if you guys, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Time Warner, have I left anyone out? Whoever you are who are building this remarkable new infrastructure, and I'm happy that you're making that investment. If you're doing that, and you do build a lane which can guarantee my livelihood, then I want to buy it. Now, if that makes me privileged, so be it. But maybe we can think of another word. Just as someone who stays here is privileged. Just as someone who has a nice car, who can afford to go to a fancy clothing store is privileged, so as a writer, I want that privilege. Maybe we should think of another word. It's more of a provocative word. But I do want to make clear that I'm not in favor of buying privilege, of having the right to have readers because you have money. That's absurd.
Andrew, you're talking about the democratization or the long-tail democratization of content. And I'm wondering whether there's a parallel to it or a difference when you're talking about the democratization of politics. And I think even you and Danny could agree that the American ideal is that everyone is equal with regard to their basic human rights, but not the fruits of their labor. On the internet, when it comes to free expression of media, isn't the long tail somewhat true? Meaning, whether or not there was a green revolution in Iran a year ago, whether or not the dissidents in China are going to prevail, isn't the democratization of the internet with Web 2.0 something that in political terms may be a transformative event where ordinary citizens can gather their strength and challenge political elites? And in that regard, why is it that we see in Western democracies, including some in the Commonwealth, like the UK, repressive censorship regimes monitoring internet content, whether it's for social norms like child pornography, or whether it's for other reasons? I'm just wondering about the non-economic effects of the democratization caused by the internet.
So it's a good question. Let me say three things in response. Firstly, my critical work focuses on the advanced industrial nations and the West, United States and the UK in particular, which are the countries I know best. The last thing I would ever be suggesting is that, you know, bloggers in Iran or China or Tibet shouldn't be allowed to express themselves, and that the government have the right to put them in jail. I have enormous admiration for bloggers in authoritarian regimes like Egypt, Iran, Russia even. So that's not the core of my argument. And I think in that sense, it's a good thing. Although I will say, and there's a DC-based guy called Yevgeny Morozov who's done a lot of work in this, I will say that, you know, the so-called Twitter revolution in Iran never happened, and that all these blogging tools and other tools are not being used in reality very effectively in Egypt. The problem, as Yevgeny Morozov has shown, is that these tools are out there, and just as a blogger can get hold of them, so can the state security apparatus. And they have more resources and more access. So the reality is that this user-generated content infrastructure has actually added a sort of an Orwellian element of complexity to the so-called user-generated blogosphere. So in China, for example, a lot of people are being turned in by people claiming to be bloggers, and so on and so forth. So I'm all in favor of the revolution in Iran. I don't like the authoritarian regime any more than anyone else. I'm a Democrat. I mean, you know, I use the term authoritarian leftist as a provocation, but I believe in democracy. I believe in voting. Final point, though, which I think is important, is you didn't do this, but a lot of people do. They somehow collapse large media companies and authoritarian governments. It's this idea we're living at a very transformative moment in cultural history at the beginning of the 21st century. A rebellion against authority, a rebellion against political parties and institutions, a rebellion against corporations, a rebellion against Wall Street. And some of those institutions are clearly bad. I mean, I'm not going to stand here and defend BP. I'm not going to stand here and defend Morgan Stanley. In some ways, I'm certainly not going to stand here and defend Fox Television, which I deplore as much as anyone. But what I would say, and I think this is a serious error, is that we fall into comparing these large institutions of post-industrial Western democracies with authoritarian regimes overseas. You know, there's this idea, for example, oh, if, I don't know, Comcast, if you allowed Comcast, for example, to, and this is, again, it's the net neutrality thing, if Comcast had access to deciding what should and shouldn't appear on their network, then they'll become the Chinese government. And I think this level of argument is ludicrous. These institutions are for-profit institutions. The large telecoms, the people invested in this debate, only have one interest: in making money, in profit. They have no interest in censorship. The nature of the regimes in Iran and perhaps in China and certainly in Egypt, their only interest is in authoritarianism, is in maintaining control and in punishing rebellion. So I think it's inappropriate and wrong and degenerate and sort of trivializes the debate to make these comparisons between you know, large banks or telecoms or political parties and repressive regimes overseas. We've lost, some people I think in this debate and this culture have lost touch with reality. Maybe they never had it in the first place.
Any other questions?
There's one guy to burn. It's nice here. I think I'll stay here all afternoon.
Thanks. Well, I think you're really a secret Republican and are going to come out of the closet. You know, you're going to vote for Carly Fiorina, and the next step.
Why'd you say that?
Well, because really, I think while you use the provocative term buying privilege, I think what you're really talking about are the concepts of respect for property rights and freedom of contract. And the next thing you know, you're going to be talking about the government engaging in regulatory takings of property by denying companies the ability to enter into the types of economic transactions that they determine in their best interests. And I think you propose that the the early days of the internet didn't work out too well because there wasn't a monetization strategy because people really didn't have contract. They thought everything was free, everything was flat. In fact, what you're emphasizing, I think, is that property rights need to be respected, both against, the government needs to protect property from criminals who steal it, and needs to avoid imposing regulatory arrangements that deny people the ability to enter into the economic transactions that that benefit their interests. So I think when you point back to Hamilton, maybe even Madison, these are fundamental propositions in the Constitution. You don't need to go to privilege; just go to property. What do you think about that?
Well, I think one can respect private property and still be a Democrat, right? I have a great respect for private property. I would vote Democrat. I'm a big admirer of Obama. So I'm not going to fall into that trap. What I will say, and it's something I missed, and perhaps it's hard to summarize a lifetime of thoughts in 15 minutes, but even for me. Given I don't have many thoughts. I did miss one important thing, and I don't want to appear as if, the subtitle of my book was Cult of the Amateur, How the Internet is Killing Our Culture. And of course, that was created by greedy publishing people in New York who wanted to max out on sales. The truth is the internet is, even in the Web 1.0 age, or in the Web 2.0 age, wasn't killing our culture. It's a more complex situation. The other thing I missed, and again, maybe Carrie won't agree with me here, I don't want to always appear as if I'm in his camp, is that there was a crisis of mainstream media without the internet. Fewer people were reading newspapers, fewer people were buying CDs, even before the internet came along. So you have a simultaneous thing going on in the Web 2.0 age. On the one hand, you have the rise of user-generated content, a flat media, a free media, a cult of the free. And on the other hand, you have a big crisis of authoritative mainstream media. And that crisis is economic, but it's also cultural. Fewer and fewer people trust the New York Times. Fewer and fewer people like the big labels. Fewer and fewer people want to have anything to do with Hollywood products. That's not just because of the internet. I think it's important to understand the internet, particularly the edge-like nature of its architecture. You need to see the internet as not only the cause of our cultural unrest and cultural uncertainty, but also the effect. Because many of the people who built the internet were themselves refugees from the counterculture of the 60s. There's a couple of excellent books on this, one by a Stanford professor called Fred Turner called From Counterculture to Cyberspace. And I think until we begin to understand that the internet isn't just technology, the internet is what I would call, if I was wearing my sociologist hat, the internet is ideology. It contains values. Until we begin to understand that, then we can't really come to terms with it. And when we look at the internet, we're not looking at some autonomous, independent technology. And this is where Web 2.0 is actually right. We're looking at ourselves. And that's why we have such strong opinions. That's why we love it, because we're living in such a narcissistic age. But that's why also we take such offense when people like us, myself, come along and say, hey, it's not as beautiful as you think it is. Because what I'm really saying is, you're not as beautiful as you think you are. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Well, I would like you all to mark your calendars for the same time next year, because we're definitely going to do this. And thank you very much for coming this year.